Agile coaches are not responsible for the transformation. They're responsible for helping the leaders transform the organization.
Yeah, the ownership is with the leader.
Welcome to Agile Clips, where we break down Agile into manageable pieces. In this episode, we talk about business agility and in particular about training offered by ICAgile.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
Very good. How are you, Santosh?
I'm doing well. So I'm glad we are able to at least get to this monthly cadence, maybe a few days here and there. But yeah, it's been quite a few things happening during last month and a half. So as I was mentioning to you, I did go to the conference, Scrum Alliance, and it was pretty in Orlando. And it was pretty well attended. But we'll cover that at some other because I have a few other topics that we want to include from there. So we will talk about that. But I think you had some interesting training sessions that you went to. So
Yes. Yeah, since the last podcast recording, I went through two ICAgile certifications, and they were both really, really interesting. To begin with, the trainings were on the weekends, so Saturdays and Sundays, starting at 5 a.m. for me in my time zone, but there were people joining from all around the world for whom some people it was nighttime, some people it was the middle of the day, all kinds of things. But they were phenomenal courses, and the trainers were two separate trainers, both very good. The second one was just absolutely outstanding, highly, highly qualified, but most of all, both of the trainers were practicing coaches, so enterprise coaches, and they really do the training not to earn money, but just because they're so passionate. They like to meet other people who are doing similar work and learn and share experiences. So the trainings were very interactive. So there was a ton of course material, and we didn't go through a lot of slides, but there were a lot of exercises done in mural boards, and so a lot of interaction with fellow students, and then going back to the main room and debriefing, and the trainers pointing out, yes, what you said is correct. That's what we believe, and I just want to really focus on this point. And so it was tremendous, really enjoyable. And there were a lot of takeaways, too many for me to even remember at the moment without going through notes. But I'll just mention a few things. For example, I really like the concept of the fact that Agile coaches are not responsible for the transformation. They're responsible for helping the leaders transform the organization.
Yeah, the ownership is with the leader.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense. And then there were all kinds of topics around personal coaching and coaching the executive team and how those things are different. And there's almost a conflict of interest if you're coaching the whole executive team and one executive says, I would like you to give me some personal coaching, because then you get into the issues of transparency and so on. So that was interesting. Of course, there was a long discussion about what agility means, and we were shared or pointed to material from the Business Agility Institute, who have a very interesting wheel with all the aspects of agility, both at all levels of the organization and from different perspectives. So that was really interesting to go through that and sort of think.
What did you feel? What's your feel about that wheel? Because I've been through that, and I like, yeah, it has some, it has like shoved everything in it, and then the point gets lost to me. At least from my point of view, it's like, wait a minute, do you have time to go through all these little slices of this, and how do you measure? I like to understand your experience about that, and I would like to really see if somebody has actually used it.
So what I thought of it is that it's interesting because it kind of lists all the different areas that one could consider. So it's not that I would formally have people go through the an evaluation or an assessment, but it's just a good reminder of all the things that are important. And then as you go through the initial conversations with leaders and team members and all the people in the organization, you can sort of treat it like a long, unprioritized backlog, and then based on the conversations you have, figure out where's the most need to do some coaching and help the organization. So
Oh,
I didn't.
I mean, I get the point of that wheel. That it gives you everything that possibly be there and kitchen sink kind of. But I want to really understand is like, okay, how do you start? Where do you start? That's one point. And then, as you were saying, you need to look at prioritized way of, or what is important to you or your organization. Let's look at those, and whether you want to fine tune it, get it better, scale it, or pivot, or whatever those things are. I mean, I get that point. Just that there is so many of those. Narrowing it down could be, just to go through all of those will take a year for an organization to look at all.
Yeah, as I said, I think it's more for the coach as a reminder of all the different aspects to consider. But anyway, I guess everybody can use it in the way that they see fit. Another learning for me was just the way ICAgile operates, which is that it's not about any one framework. So that there's no promotion of Scrum or Kanban or SAFe or anything like that. And indeed, that's not what enterprise coaching is all about. It's really the business side of things, and it's framework independent. And in some organizations, one implementation framework may be better than another. It just varies. I have to say that both trainers were very full of stories, some of them quite funny. And so one part of the discussion we had was about the importance of the system around you. So it doesn't matter how individuals and teams behave, it's the system that surrounds them that has a big impact. And so one of the funny stories was, who are the best drivers in the world? It's Indians, but not when they're driving in India, though. But when both these trainers live in Canada, and one of them was Indian. So basically, we're saying in Canada, the system is very well organized, and people know they have to behave when they're driving, and so Indians are great drivers.
Yeah, but that's a good point when they are not driving in India.
Yeah, so it was, that was entertaining at times. Another thing with this particular training organization, and I'm not going to mention who they are, but they do provide a portal with a ton of material. So both as you attend and you're given homework and exercises and so on, but there are just tons of videos and articles to read, and they don't all have to be read during the course, but it remains as a really great resource to look at afterwards. So I'm just continuing to go and absorb more and more material, having been given some pointers as to what things are really important. So as we speak here, I'm just going through some of my notes. Oh, there was one thing that I learned from a totally different seminar about coaching, not related to ICAgile, but it really appealed to me, which is when you're coaching someone, ask them what they want to achieve, what they want to avoid, and what's the next step to get there. And most people will know what the next step is. They just instinctively, automatically know. It's like saying to somebody, okay, what do you want to achieve? You want to lose weight. What you want to avoid is being ill. So what's the next step? And people will say, oh, I have to eat properly. I have to go to the gym. They just know, but they don't do it. So I thought that was interesting.
That's the one part, is that, the answer should come from them instead of you feeding. It's like, organic way of pulling the answer from. And that's the total coaching stand of you never lead them to it. Let them think that they found the answer, and then they will do it instead of you telling them.
Absolutely.
I mean, sometimes, sometimes you have to say, oh, these are the options. But yeah, it is really true that if they thought that they thought of it. That's it.
Yeah, but the what I like was the simplicity of the questions, because all coaches know about the powerful questions, which are a little bit more sophisticated, but maybe they're not as necessary as we think, given this very simple recipe
Hmm.
that's really easy to remember. There were lots of really good stories. For example, one of these coaches was in an organization, and it turned out that the developers were measured on not having bugs in their code, and the testers were measured on finding bugs. So they could never, they had different personal goals and they could never work well together because
Yeah.
of that. So,
Is it a feature or a bug?
right. So this coach suggested that we we should measure the number of customer found defects. So now it was they really wanted to collaborate because the metrics were outside of their control in a
Yeah.
sense, but
Yeah.
they had the
Well,
same common incentive.
right. The escape defects is always and that's what really counts anyway. If
True, very true.
the quality and the impression and the NPS and all those things come back to haunt you, if the quality, that perceived quality by the customer or end consumer, is not really good, then that reflects. So yeah, I think that makes total sense.
But anyway, the key there is obviously if you can align people on common goals, then they will be more successful as a team than if they all have their own goals. It's obvious, but it's good to hear it sometimes. We went through a lot of discussion about how can you motivate people to do things and not, and the whole idea of you can only coach people who want to be coached, and is that really true? So there were no, I don't think there were any conclusions, but we were referred to a lot of different approaches about motivating people, and it's interesting. But anyway, supposedly the research shows you can't really motivate others to do things, which to me was surprising. But I don't know what your experience is with that.
Well, I mean, motivation is really needs to come within, and there has to be, is almost like a what's in it for me, and I think that's the ultimate motivating fact. Is this going to benefit me in one way, whatever the shape or form? And I think it could be reward system, it could be whatever their values are. So if you can relate to that motivation, that motivating factor, I think that's like reading your audience as to what they will like, where and what they want to get out of it. As you were earlier asking, what do you want to out of all that? Will tell you whether you are, whatever you're coaching or you're trying to motivate, is that going to take hold? Because people listen to you and they say, yeah, it's not for me, kind of. So then there is a motivation. But the one, I think we when we were working together, we found one of the things how to motivate is one of the best way to do, we found, was the peer pressure. If the other person in your group starts getting better using some method or whatever, like somebody starts losing weight, now the other person takes the notes, like, I better start eating or doing whatever I have to get to that. So
True.
it's that's works like a charm. And
Yeah,
so I think that's kind of I guess it's a passive way of doing it, but still it works.
yeah, there is one of the philosophies of helping people change is exactly that, which is do they have a personal motivation? Is the motivation coming from their peer group, from their organization? And then, in addition to wanting to change, are the factors there needed to actually change? So, for example, somebody could be perfectly happy to update tickets in Jira, but if they don't know how to do it,
Yeah.
they will not do it. So there's a training aspect to make sure that people can actually have the ability to do what they want to do. Anyway, going through my notes, there was we sort of touched on this already, but there was a bit of a discussion about roles and responsibilities and clarifying those, and in particular the coach's role in the organization. So it's going back to the idea that we help the leaders change the organization. The coach is not directly responsible for it, but the statement was that there's often confusion about the coach's role. They're almost viewed like a super scrum master. They can end up scheduling meetings and
Yeah.
doing things like that, and it should be clear that that's not why they're there, and They're almost like a business consultant. They're there to help at that level.
Well, that funny you should mention this. Is actually what we have been saying also is you will introduce an idea, let's meet for that, or let's have a workshop for that. But your client or whoever you're coaching, they need to schedule. If you start scheduling, then you become the kind of,
Admin,
oh yeah, yeah. So it's really they have to have it's like a skin in the game, whoever is being coached,
right.
and they need to say, oh okay, I will schedule, and that small thing gives you the indication that yes, the person is bought into it. If they don't schedule, then it's okay. Well, it's like they don't want to get coached. You don't do it well, that's okay.
It's almost a good segue to the next point, which is one of the first things you have to do when you go into an organization is to really understand why the organization wants to make a change. Because then you can always refer back to it. So it could be a environmental thing, it could be the competition, they could be, they're falling behind and they want to be number one or two in the industry. But if you can really pinpoint the one concise statement about why they want to change, then you can get a lot of leverage from it.
Yeah, it's like typical things, now the typical measure is what are the OKRs they're trying to accomplish. And that's a good motivator, saying, yeah, here is the reason why the organization wants to change. And yeah, there could be some survival issues. There could be some leadership issues that we want to keep on the leading, like one or two kind of. And then it really, but what it emphasizes is basically the push has to come. You need to have the champion at the at almost like a executive level leadership, saying that, yeah, I want to get this, here is the reason why we want it. And then people will start thinking about, okay, how do I contribute? Bottom up is how, but why and what really comes from the top.
Exactly. That's exactly the next point I have in my notes. It says first figure out the why, then figure out the how and the when, and then figure out how you're going to measure success.
Yeah, and I think there was something about, I just was on one of the I guess podcast I was listening to, and they had something similar as to what do we measure and why, and that measurement really drives a lot of motivation, a lot of results that we are trying to do, those kind of things. And the typical word is to keep the leadership to make it into a weaponized way of measuring. So, and how to avoid that.
Yep. So then we went on to talk about funding, not for coaching, but funding for all projects. And there was an interesting thing which makes a lot of sense. I'd never thought about it before, but the separation of budgeting from allocation. So meaning that usually the financial people care mostly about what the budget is and how much is set aside more than they care about how it's spent. It's not entirely true. Other people care about how it's spent, but if you can separate that, it gives you a lot more agility because you can then decide if a project is not working out, you can switch, use the same budgeted funds to start another project. So change the allocation to something that is proving more worthwhile.
But
so
that's a really good point of view, in the sense that the budgets are like a pool of money, and I guess they are given to get some result. Now, how to get that results out is a individual or that leadership's prerogative. And I think that makes total sense, in the sense that you have been given the sandbox. How to play in it is really your decision, and getting it done. So that, yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
Yes, right, exactly. I think we're back to the wheel. So I think the inner area of that wheel that we were talking about is there are 5 categories, which is the company responsive? Does it have an engaged culture? Does it have a value-based delivery, flexible operations, and the people-first leadership? So I think if there are too many spokes on the wheel, it's helpful to just think at least at the highest level of those 5 elements to decide where maybe focus needs to be applied.
Yeah, that's the criteria for mean, I like that fact that they had, create those broad categories. And if you
Right.
look at those are very soft categories. They're not like, so it's a very interpretive way of your own environment. That thing might look different. That those 5 categories look, culture is a different thing. People first, well, what does that mean to your organization?
We were told a story about snakes in India. Obviously, this was the Indian trainer.
Of course.
Um, so apparently, the British had wanted to build some, I think, a city or the part of a city in an area where there were so many snakes. I don't, maybe you know the story. So they decided to provide financial incentives to the population to go and catch these snakes. But then what they realized is that, in fact, these people, the number of snakes went up and the number that were caught went up, but for the wrong reasons, because these people were very crafty and they realized they could make money. So they started breeding snakes so they could then take them and say, I caught a snake. And so the whole thing misfired or backfired, I should say. So
It's like, the similar thing with this velocity. How many points do you want?
yeah, right.
Then if you want
Gaming the
so many
system.
points, right, exactly. So it's very we know how to relate to that.
Oh yes, but again, the point was just think about the whole system and about unintended consequences of changes that you make. Another thing was to talk about containers, that parts of a system are bound together by a container. So a container could be the team that you're a part of, like a Scrum team, but you might also be part of a functional organization, such as testers, and that's a different container. And then you go home and your passion is cooking, then you're part of some club that gets together to do food tastings, and that's another container. So when you deal with people, you have to kind of understand the container that they're a part of, because that helps you relate to them.
It's like, there was that tribe and that construct as to, you have those different tribes and then you have
Like in the
village and
Spotify model, you mean?
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
well, yeah, extension of that, but yeah, people are in social circles different,
And
and but yeah, this I can relate to that because it's you change, even just go from one room to the other, you're in a different state of mind.
right. And so an example would be if there could be two people who are members of a team and they're always arguing with each other when it comes to work. But if they both have a passion for food, when they're in that container, they could be the
Yeah.
best of friends. So you always have to sort of be mindful of all these different parts of the system and how they relate to each other. Oh, this was another funny story. I'll share it. It was about people just blindly following a process and why that doesn't work. And so apparently there were two people. One person was digging a hole, and the next person was following them and just filling the hole. And they just were walking down the street, digging a hole, filling the hole, digging a hole, filling the hole. So someone accosted them and said, what the heck is going on here? And they said, well, we're just doing our job. There's supposed to be a third person who puts a tree in the
Oh.
hole between us, but he's out sick. But we're just doing our job.
That's funny.
So I like that, just to be aware of people who are just following a process without
Yeah.
thinking about what the outcomes are. After that, I went for the certified Agile Transformation, or CAT. And there was a really nice icebreaker on the very first day. So for this course, there were 6 students. So the very first thing we did was we were broken into 3 breakouts, and we each had to tell our partner in the breakout things about us, like where we live, are we married, what our hobbies are, and so on. And then when we regrouped, the other person had to tell the group about you.
Oh, okay, what they heard.
Yes, so that was really an amazing way to get to know somebody quickly and as a warm-up exercise. So I can see opportunities to use that in future. There was a whole discussion about why companies want to be agile, and the fact that technology is just changing so fast, customer preferences change so fast. And even COVID was mentioned as a example of how companies need to be able to respond quickly to changes in the environment. So those were just reminders of some of the reasons why companies might want to change the way they behave. This was interesting that someone who's driving a transformation cannot be expected to be an expert in every area of the transformation. So it could be there's a business side of it, there's a technical, there's being able to facilitate, teach, mentoring, being the actual transformational coach. So you have to be familiar with all these different needs and bringing in the right people at the right time to work on those things.
Right. I think we had talked about this. There was that analogy that we used to use, like, in the room when we are physically there, used to have an empty chair always. And that was the leadership chair. So that leadership could come based upon their situation, who had the skill set or who had the expertise would lead that. So there was not going to be a leader assigned. He or she knew everything about everything. But that's exactly, I mean, that makes total sense. And that really how the team collaborates. They build the expertise and bulldozing and then complement each other.
Yeah. The next topic was about change management, and there are so many different techniques. For example, the Kotter 8-step process, the Kubler-Ross model, the ADKAR model.
Yeah.
So many models, which essentially they're all about some form of preparation, and they're making the changes in various ways and then reinforcing the results, measuring the results, and then going through the loop again.
Right.
So that was interesting just to kind of get that idea of so many things.
What I've seen in this change management is that they all these tools or whatever methods, they all come down to is what are we learning from each and getting the feedback into the next loop. So you might traverse the loop in a different way, but finally it has to go back to the feedback and the whole cycle. So it's a very interesting observation that they said, yeah, every one of those always rely on that feedback. And I think 90% of the time that feedback is missing. It goes only one direction.
Yes, that's right. We talked about a particular type of workshop when first engaging with a client, which is to understand or work with the leadership in a workshop format and understand where the organization is today, have them envision the future and what it's like to work there in the future, if they can achieve that vision, and then discuss what are the options to get there, which is, it's all common sense. A lot of this is common sense. It's always just a kind of reminder of all the different aspects and how they work together.
Right? The common sense is not as common as is believed.
Definitely. No, there were so many topics. How leaders often think that others need coaching and they don't. But you have to really have a lot of empathy to help people understand what they need, which they might not realize.
Well, I think one of the episodes that we had talked about was exactly that, in the sense that sometimes the leader has to realize that sometimes they are the problem. And it is always that realization comes the last, because they are controlling the decisions. So it's like, oh, you do that, I'll tell you this. Well, no, that is what is causing this whole churn or whatever that problem is. So making that realization at that level, at wherever the decisions are coming from, saying that maybe that's where the problem is starting.
That's right. And also, we talked about the fact that core beliefs drive action. So if you want to change the way people act, you have to change their core beliefs. So you really have to make them aware of things that they may believe, but in practice they haven't even worked. And so if you can identify those, you can help them change. Then there was a discussion about leadership style, and there was an exercise with 4 quadrants, and we had to say whether a leader was like a people leader or innovative, command control, autocratic, and so on. And the final answer was, other than autocratic leaders, every other type of leadership style is neither good nor bad. It's just is it appropriate for the situation that the organization is in? So sometimes you need command and control, and other times that's not the right thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes democracy is not the only answer.
Right, exactly. I like the fact that leadership is not based on title, but the way people influence others to follow them. That's the true leadership. So a lot of these things are a little bit abstract, but we also went through a lot of very practical exercises and techniques and things that pretty much give you kind of framework or a recipe for how to do things. So I've always wondered, is the one approach that works better than another, which is do you try and change the culture first and then the practices will follow? Is it the other way around? And according to this trainer and coach, very experienced coach, it's really, you need a mixture of the two at the same time.
Okay.
And I really like the idea of thinking about in an organization, what's the technology, what's the leadership, what's the culture, what's the design of the organization and the people. And all of those are important elements that need to be transformed. And one thing,
there was some definition I thought, forget where that was, but it's like what culture means is actually another process, unwritten process. That's because you follow certain steps or certain ways of doing it, and it's like that's the way it is. Well, that's your culture.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it derives from certain processes that are in place, and you put those things around. So either you can change that mindset about how do you want to look, and then change the process, or the process can drive what the culture is going to look like.
I thought this thinking about these 5 elements of the technology, the leadership, the organizational design, people, and culture again, is a very powerful thing to think about, which is when you're trying to transform the organization, it doesn't matter what practices you bring in. If the whole design of the organization is incompatible with agility, then you're not going to succeed. Or maybe it's a technological problem that needs to be solved before everything else. And maybe the culture is great, the people are great, the leadership is great, but they have some really old technology that's really holding them back and preventing them being agile.
Yeah, yeah.
We spent a lot of time talking about different types of assessments again. I did mention ADKAR, and I'll repeat it because this is a model of change, which can be measured, but our trainer really liked this one above all else, all the other techniques, and just the acronym stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So in order to change an organization or people, you need to first of all make them aware, then find out what's needed to make them want to change. That's the desire. Then give them the knowledge to change. Make sure that they're really able to do it, not just theoretically have the knowledge, but sort of help them through learning and practice, and then just keep reinforcing it.
Yeah.
So that was nice. I feel like I'm a parrot just repeating what I heard.
Well,
And it's really a pretty intense course, and there's a lot that still needs to sink in.
Well, this is almost like another repeat of your course, revision. Make sure.
Right, exactly. That's right. Yeah, I think when I have time, I want to put it in a mind map. I love mind maps, so this would be a great way of tying everything together. Yep.
So it really why every Scrum Master cannot be coach. That's exactly what that is, because your level of thinking is different. Your approach to the problem is different.
Right. I think we're getting close to the end of the podcast. We don't want to bore people to death, so I'll just finish by talking about an interesting framework, which was how to attack a transformation. So the idea was you can have a canvas in which at the top you talk about the vision of the company, and then sort of more granular goals. And then you have to think about what's the current operating model of the company and what's the target operating model. And then once you do that, you can think about what are the things that are in your favor to reach your target operating model and what organizational impediments are there. So that helps you come up with a set of options, and you can put the options pretty much in a kind of Kanban board. So you list the options, then you prioritize them, then you prepare, then they go into progress, then you review how that change went, and then you go on to the next set of changes that you want to make. And in between all of that, you need to have a very clear communication plan to make sure that everybody understands what's happening, how they're going to be impacted or not, and so on. So that was just a nice framework to kind of think about how you go about bringing changes to an organization. So to wrap things up, I think the number one takeaway for me was that being a true enterprise coach is not about scaling the agile practices from the team level through the organization. It's much more like being a business consultant, really digging into the fundamental issues that the company has from different perspectives, and then helping them change themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that's the kind of 20,000 or 60,000 mile view of what this is all about.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And it is really, that's the switch that every coach has to make, is to going into that direction, because that can sustain.
Yes, definitely not easy.
No, not easy. Well, otherwise everyone can do it.
That's right. In fact, organizations could do it themselves.
Right.
Yep. You always need that external perspective to help you realize what's going wrong and why.
People get too close to the problem, they lose the side vision.
Very good.
All right. Great. Well, this is really extensive. I think I'm glad we were able to at least summarize where things are. I'm quite excited. I'm going to be attending that enterprise ICAgile course, and then we can compare notes after that.
That's right. Looking forward to it.
Yep.
All right. So bye, Santosh. Bye, everybody.
Bye.